Did you know that one of the most famous musical numbers in Hollywood history was almost cut from the film entirely? That sparkling, diamond-drenched performance that the whole world remembers almost never made it to the screen. Hard to believe, right? Gentlemen Prefer Blondes looks like a perfect, shiny movie, but behind every sparkle, there was sweat, struggle, and some very surprising secrets. Let's dive in and discover 20 weird and amazing facts about Gentlemen Prefer Blondes. Number 20. The movie was based on a very old story. Long before Marilyn Monroe ever slipped on a sequined dress or Jane Russell flashed her famous smile at the camera, this story already had a life of its own. It started as a novel. A writer named Anita Loos published Gentlemen Prefer Blondes all the way back in 1925. That is nearly 30 years before the movie version arrived in theaters. The book was funny, sharp, and a little bit scandalous for its time. People loved it immediately. It told the story of Lorelei Lee, a clever blonde woman who knew exactly how to charm the world around her. The book became so popular that it was turned into a Broadway play just a year later, in 1926. That play was a big hit too. Then, even before the famous 1953 film, there was already a silent movie version made in 1928. So by the time Marilyn Monroe stepped into the role, Lorelei Lee was already a well-known character with a long and colorful history. Most people watching the 1953 film had no idea they were seeing the third version of this story. They thought it was brand new, and in many ways, it felt brand new because Monroe brought something completely different to the character. She made Lorelei feel alive in a way no one had before. But it is always amazing to think about how a story can travel through decades, changing shape and voice along the way, until it finally finds the version that makes the whole world stop and stare. What felt fresh and modern was actually a story nearly 3 decades old. Old roots, brand new bloom. Number 19. Marilyn Monroe was not the first choice. Here is something that might surprise you. When the studio first started thinking about who would play Lorelei Lee in this film, Marilyn Monroe was not at the top of their list, not even close. The role was originally being considered for a very different kind of star. Some accounts suggest that Betty Grable, one of the biggest names in Hollywood at the time, was the first serious candidate for the part. Betty Grable was a massive star in the 1940s. Her legs were literally insured for $1 million, which tells you just how famous she was. She had a warm, sunny personality, and audiences adored her. The studio felt comfortable with her. She was a known quantity. But things in Hollywood rarely stay simple. Marilyn Monroe was rising fast. Her star was climbing higher with every film she made, and the studio began to see that she had something electric, something that could not be manufactured or copied. She had a magnetic quality that made audiences lean forward in their seats. Eventually, the decision shifted. Monroe was cast, and once she was in place, it became almost impossible to imagine anyone else in the role. She owned it completely. She transformed Lorelei from a clever character on a page into a living, breathing, unforgettable screen presence. But for a little while, the movie's history could have gone in a very different direction. Sometimes the right person for a role arrives just in time, right at the exact moment the door opens. One last-minute decision changed movie history. Number 18. Jane Russell was paid much more than Marilyn Monroe. Now this one is truly shocking when you hear it for the first time. Jane Russell and Marilyn Monroe share the screen in this film as best friends, equal partners, two halves of a brilliant comedy duo. They seem perfectly matched. But behind the scenes, the money told a completely different story. Jane Russell was being paid $100,000 for her work on the film. Marilyn Monroe received only $15,000. That is a staggering difference. We are talking about one actress earning nearly 7 times more than the other. And the twist? Marilyn Monroe's performance is widely considered the one that defined the movie. She is the one people quote. She is the one people remember when they think of this film. But in 1953, Monroe was still building her reputation while Russell was already an established name with serious Hollywood power behind her. Russell had a contract with a major producer and had been in the industry longer. The business of Hollywood has always had a strange relationship with fairness. Talent does not always equal pay. Timing, connections, and perception all play a role. Monroe later became the highest-paid female star in the world, but in this particular film, she was drastically underpaid. What is remarkable is that none of this bitterness showed on screen. The two women had genuine warmth and chemistry together. They laughed, they sparkled, they made magic. What looked like equal partnership was actually a very unequal arrangement. But the friendship between them was real, and no number could measure that. Number 17. The famous pink dress. Almost did not happen. Close your eyes for a moment and think about Marilyn Monroe in Gentlemen Prefer Blondes. Chances are, the first image that appears in your mind involves a bright, bold, pink satin dress. That gown is now one of the most iconic costume moments in all of cinema history. It has been copied, referenced, and celebrated for decades. But that dress almost did not exist in the form we know it. The costume designer for the film was a talented woman named William Travilla, who went by the name Travilla. He designed many extraordinary outfits for Monroe throughout her career, but this pink gown became the crown jewel of his work. The creation of the dress involved careful thought about color, shape, and movement. Pink was a deliberate and bold choice. It was not the most obvious option for a glamorous Hollywood number, but Travilla understood that pink would pop on screen in a way that felt both playful and powerful. The strapless design, the long gloves, the sweeping skirt, every element worked together to create something that felt like a visual explosion. Monroe wore it with such confidence and grace that the dress became part of her identity. When Madonna recreated the look in her Material Girl music video decades later, the tribute was unmistakable. The dress had crossed from movie costume into cultural mythology. But behind that perfect image was a designer making bold, unconventional choices. What looked inevitable was actually a creative risk. One daring choice created an eternal image. Number 16. Howard Hawks directed the film with a very clever strategy. The director of Gentlemen Prefer Blondes was a legendary filmmaker named Howard Hawks. He was known for his sharp instincts and his ability to bring out performances that felt completely natural and alive. But working on this film required a special kind of patience and skill, particularly when it came to working with Marilyn Monroe. Monroe was known for needing many takes to get a scene right. She sometimes struggled with her lines, needing dozens of attempts before a moment felt exactly right. Some directors found this frustrating. Howard Hawks had a different approach entirely. He understood that Monroe's magic could not be rushed or forced. He gave her time. He gave her space. He created a calm environment on set where she felt supported rather than pressured. He also had a very smart way of protecting the energy of scenes. He would often film simple moments and complex moments in the same session, giving Monroe smaller wins that built her confidence before tackling the harder scenes. His strategy was quiet and invisible, but it worked beautifully. The result was a performance from Monroe that felt effortless and free, even though achieving that effortlessness took enormous effort behind the camera. Hawks also had a gift for comedy. He understood how to build a joke visually, how to let silence do its work, how to let two women carry a scene with nothing but their personalities. He trusted his cast, and that trust came back to him 100-fold. What looked effortless on screen was the result of careful, invisible craftsmanship. Number 15. The diamonds are a girl's best friend. Number took weeks to prepare. When people talk about great musical performances in movie history, Diamonds Are a Girl's Best Friend always comes up. It is a masterpiece of staging, performance, and visual design. Everything about it feels perfectly constructed. And it was, but constructing it took far longer and required far more work than most people ever imagine. The rehearsals for this number stretched over several weeks. The choreography was intricate and demanding. Monroe had to learn precise movements while also delivering a vocal performance that felt warm and spontaneous. She also had to look completely at ease in an elaborate costume while surrounded by dozens of dancers, all moving in perfect coordination. The staging itself was a complex puzzle. The color scheme, the positioning of the dancers, the camera angles. Every single element was planned with great care. The director and choreographer worked closely together to make sure that Monroe was always at the visual center without the number ever feeling static or boring. What they created was a piece of controlled chaos that looked like perfect order. Monroe herself worked incredibly hard during this period. She rehearsed until her feet hurt and her voice was tired. She pushed through discomfort because she understood that this number could define her career. And she was right. Decades later, people still watch that performance and feel the electricity of it. But behind the bright lights and the beautiful costumes was weeks of exhausting, painstaking preparation. It looked easy, but it was chaos. Number 14, Jane Russell and Marilyn Monroe had a genuine friendship. Hollywood is full of stories about co-stars who secretly cannot stand each other. There are tales of rivalry, jealousy, and behind-the-scenes tension disguised as smiling professionalism on screen. Gentlemen Prefer Blondes is not one of those stories. Jane Russell and Marilyn Monroe genuinely liked each other. This was not a performance. It was real. Russell was a grounded, confident woman who felt no need to compete with Monroe or feel threatened by her growing fame. She recognized Monroe's extraordinary talent and appreciated it openly. Monroe, for her part, felt comfortable around Russell in a way she did not always feel around other people in the industry. Monroe struggled with anxiety and insecurity throughout her life, and the film industry was not always a kind environment. But Russell's steady warmth and humor helped Monroe feel safe. The two women would talk between takes, laugh together, and look out for each other on set. Russell later recalled that Monroe was deeply kind and deeply funny, that the public image of a dizzy blonde was completely at odds with the sharp, emotionally intelligent woman Russell actually knew. Their friendship also translated directly onto the screen in a way that no director could have manufactured. The genuine affection between them gave the film a beating heart. It turned two characters into real friends, and real friends into movie magic. What could have been cold and professional became something genuinely warm. Not just acting, but real friendship. Number 13, the film was shot entirely on a studio backlot. Here is a detail that might change the way you watch this film forever. Gentlemen Prefer Blondes is set largely in France. The characters travel on an ocean liner. They arrive in Paris. They explore a glamorous European world full of luxury and excitement. But here is the secret. Not a single frame of this movie was actually shot in France. The entire production was filmed on the backlots and sound stages of 20th Century Fox in Hollywood, California. Every beautiful Parisian street, every elegant ballroom, every grand ocean liner corridor. All of it was built by set designers and craftspeople in a studio. The ocean liner scenes were filmed on a set that was constructed to look perfectly realistic from every camera angle, even though it was sitting completely still on dry land in California. The Paris scenes used painted backdrops, clever lighting, and carefully built facades to create the illusion of a real European city. In 1953, international filming was expensive and logistically complicated. Studios had become extraordinarily good at creating entire worlds without ever leaving their own property. The craftsmanship required to pull this off was remarkable. Viewers watching the film today are still sometimes surprised to learn that what looked like real locations were entirely constructed environments. The team of designers, painters, and builders who created these spaces were artists in their own right, even if their names rarely appeared in headlines. What looked like Paris was Hollywood magic all along. Number 12. The film changed. How studios saw Marilyn Monroe. Before Gentlemen Prefer Blondes, the studio system had a complicated relationship with Marilyn Monroe. They knew she was attractive. They knew audiences responded to her. But they were not entirely sure how to use her, how to position her, or how seriously to take her as a commercial force. Some executives saw her as a novelty, a pretty face who would have a brief moment of popularity and then fade away. This film changed that thinking permanently. When Gentlemen Prefer Blondes was released in the summer of 1953, it became one of the biggest box office hits of the year. Audiences rushed to theaters. They came back multiple times. They talked about it with their friends. And overwhelmingly, the person they talked about most was Marilyn Monroe. Her performance sparked a kind of public excitement that the studio had never quite seen before. It was clear to everyone that Monroe was not a novelty. She was a phenomenon. After the film's success, the studio began approaching her very differently. They gave her more powerful roles. They invested more money in her projects. They recognized that she had the rare ability to make a movie feel like an event rather than just a film. Monroe herself used this new leverage to fight for better roles, better pay, and more creative control over her career. A battle she would continue to wage for the rest of her professional life. One hit film rewrote the rules of an entire career. Number 11. The choreography was created by a dance legend. The dazzling dance numbers in Gentlemen Prefer Blondes did not create themselves. Behind every perfectly timed step and every precisely angled pose was a choreographer named Jack Cole. Jack Cole was one of the most influential dance creators in Hollywood history, though his name is far less famous than the work he produced. He had a unique style that blended jazz movement with theatrical drama and classical technique. He understood how to make a body tell a story, how to use movement to reveal character and emotion in ways that words could not. Working with Marilyn Monroe required a very specific kind of skill. Monroe was not trained as a dancer in the traditional sense. She was not a ballet dancer or a formally trained stage performer. But she had something that many technically trained dancers lacked. She had an instinctive physical presence that the camera loved. Cole understood this. He did not try to make Monroe into something she was not. Instead, he built the choreography around her natural strengths, creating movement that felt like an extension of her personality rather than something imposed upon it. The result was dancing that felt completely organic, as if Monroe had simply decided to move that way all on her own. Jack Cole worked with Monroe on several films throughout her career, and each time the collaboration produced something extraordinary. Great choreography is invisible because it looks inevitable. Cole's greatest achievement was making difficult work look easy. Number 10. The movie made pink. A symbol of power before Gentlemen Prefer Blondes, pink was considered a soft, delicate, sweet color. It was associated with gentleness and innocence. It was not typically seen as a color that carried strength or authority. This film changed that. When Marilyn Monroe stood at the center of the screen in that famous pink satin gown, surrounded by men in black tuxedos, something shifted in the cultural conversation around color. The contrast was intentional and brilliant. One woman in blazing pink commanding an entire room. The men around her were props. She was the focus, the force, the center of gravity. The color pink in that moment was not soft at all. It was powerful, it was strategic, it was a visual statement about who held the attention and who controlled the space. Fashion historians and cultural critics have written extensively about this moment and its lasting impact. Pink became associated with a particular kind of confident femininity, not fragile, not passive, but bold and deliberate. The dress was eventually sold at auction and became one of the most discussed costume pieces in film history. Its influence rippled through fashion, music, advertising, and popular culture for decades. When Madonna wore a pink gown in her Material Girl video in 1985, the tribute was deliberate and unmistakable. A single costume choice rewrote the meaning of a color. What felt like a fashion decision became a cultural revolution. Number 9. Marilyn Monroe struggled deeply. During filming, here is a part of the story that the shining surface of the film does not show. Marilyn Monroe was brilliant on screen. She was warm, funny, magnetic, and utterly unforgettable. But making this film was not easy for her. Monroe struggled with anxiety throughout her life and the pressure of being on a film set, with cameras pointed at her, crew members watching her every move, and the constant weight of expectation, was genuinely difficult for her to manage. She often needed many takes to get a scene right, not because she was careless, but because she was searching for something real and true in every moment. She was deeply committed to her craft in a way that sometimes looked like difficulty from the outside. There were days when Monroe arrived on set late, when she needed extra time to prepare, when the emotional demands of the work left her exhausted and fragile. Some crew members were frustrated. Others were endlessly patient. Howard Hawks, the director, generally fell into the patient camp, understanding that Monroe's process was unconventional, but that the results were extraordinary. What audiences saw on screen was pure light and laughter. What happened behind that light was a much more complicated and human story. Monroe was fighting her own private battles every single day, while simultaneously creating performances that would outlive everyone involved in the production. The joy on screen masked real struggle behind it. That wasn't just acting, that was courage. Number 8. The two female stars created a lasting template. Gentlemen Prefer Blondes gave Hollywood something it had rarely seen before in such clear and effective form: a true female double act. Lorelei Lee and Dorothy Shaw, played by Marilyn Monroe and Jane Russell, were two women who were completely different in personality, but completely devoted to each other. One was soft and dreamy, the other sharp and direct. One used charm, the other used wit. Together, they were unstoppable. This template, the dreamy one and the grounded one, the soft one and the sharp one, became one of the most repeated formulas in entertainment history. You can trace a direct line from Monroe and Russell to countless buddy comedies, television partnerships, and cinematic friendships that followed. The key element that made the original work so well was balance. Neither woman was more important than the other. Neither was the sidekick. They were genuinely equal, even when the world around them tried to make them compete. The film presented female friendship as something sacred and unbreakable, something worth more than any man or any diamond. For audiences in 1953, this was both entertaining and quietly radical. Women supporting each other on screen, genuinely and without jealousy, was not as common as it should have been. This film made it look easy and joyful. It planted a seed that kept growing for decades. Two women, one story, endless influence. Number 7. The film had a hidden satirical edge. When most people watch Gentlemen Prefer Blondes, they see a bright, cheerful, funny musical about two women traveling through a glamorous world. And it is all of those things. But underneath the glitter and the comedy, the film has a sharp satirical edge that many viewers miss on first viewing. The story is gently but clearly mocking the men in it. The male characters are largely vain, foolish, easily manipulated, and completely convinced of their own superiority. And yet they are consistently outwitted by the two women they underestimate. Lorelei Lee, the character everyone dismisses as a silly blonde, is actually the sharpest strategic thinker in every room she enters. She knows exactly what she wants, she knows exactly how to get it, and she never once loses control of a situation. She just lets other people believe they are in control. This is not an accident. Anita Loos, who wrote the original novel, was a deeply witty and perceptive writer who was very aware of the absurdity of the world she was observing. The satire in the story was baked in from the very beginning. The film version carried that satirical spirit forward, even while wrapping it in beautiful costumes and catchy songs. Some viewers in 1953 caught the joke, others did not. But the joke was always there, running quietly under the surface like a current. What looked like fluff was actually critique. Number 6. The court scene. Almost derailed the entire production. There is a scene in Gentlemen Prefer Blondes where the characters find themselves in a courtroom situation that requires quick thinking and creative problem-solving. Behind the scenes, creating this scene created its own kind of legal and logistical headache for the filmmakers. The studio had to navigate carefully around questions of what could and could not be shown on screen, based on the strict production code that governed Hollywood films at the time. The production code was a set of rules that film studios had agreed to follow, controlling what content could appear in movies. Certain jokes, certain situations, and certain visual gags had to be carefully worded and constructed so that they passed through the code's requirements without triggering cuts or demands for changes. The creative team working on the film became very skilled at finding ways to imply things rather than show them directly, to let the audience's imagination do the work while keeping the actual content technically acceptable. This kind of creative constraint often produces very interesting results. When you cannot say something directly, you find clever, oblique, funny ways to say it sideways. Some of the film's sharpest jokes exist precisely because the filmmakers had to find ways around direct expression. The restriction became a creative engine. What looked like freedom was actually the product of very careful maneuvering. Sometimes the walls around you make you more creative, not less. Number 5. The film's songs became permanent parts of popular culture. Diamonds Are a Girl's Best Friend is one of the most recognizable songs in the history of popular music. That is not an exaggeration. Decades after the film was released, the song continues to appear in movies, television shows, advertisements, and live performances around the world. It has been covered, referenced, and reimagined hundreds of times. But what is remarkable is that the song was not an established hit before the film. It was written specifically for the movie. The songwriters, Jule Stein and Leo Robin, created a piece of music that perfectly captured the character of Lorelei Lee. Playful, knowing, a little cynical about romance, but completely honest about what she valued. Monroe's delivery of the song was a masterclass in comic performance. She played every note of the irony without ever letting the character become mean or unlikable. The song walked a very delicate tonal line, and Monroe navigated it with extraordinary skill. The other significant song from the film, Two Little Girls from Little Rock, gave audiences a window into the characters' shared history and added a layer of emotion and vulnerability to what might otherwise have felt like a pure comedy. Together, the songs gave the film its heartbeat. They turned scenes into moments and moments into memories. A song written for a movie became a song that would never stop being sung. Number 4. The film was a box office giant. Gentlemen Prefer Blondes was released on July 1, 1953. From the very first weekend, it was clear that something special had happened. Audiences arrived in enormous numbers. The film quickly became one of the highest-grossing pictures of the year. It outperformed many of the other major releases, competing with it for audience attention, and it kept performing strongly over weeks and months as word of mouth spread and people brought their friends and families back to see it again. The financial success of the film had important consequences for everyone involved. It confirmed Marilyn Monroe's position as a genuine box office force. It validated the studio's decision to invest in a musical comedy with two strong female leads at its center. It demonstrated that audiences were hungry for entertainment that was bright, funny, and full of personality. The film's commercial performance also gave it cultural momentum. A movie that makes money gets talked about. People who have not seen it become curious. Critics pay more attention to it. Songs from it get more radio play. The success fed itself. By the end of 1953, Gentlemen Prefer Blondes had cemented its place not just as a hit, but as a cultural touchstone. What began as a studio bet became a landmark. Sometimes success has a way of creating its own legend. Number 3. Marilyn Monroe studied method acting. During this film, here is something that surprises many people. At the same time that Marilyn Monroe was filming Gentlemen Prefer Blondes and delivering what looked like perfectly natural, instinctive performances, she was also deeply engaged in the study of acting as a serious craft. Monroe had been working with acting coaches and studying approaches to performance that were considered very serious and intellectually demanding. She was particularly drawn to a style of acting called method acting, which asks performers to draw on their own real emotions and memories to fuel their characters. This approach requires deep internal work. It is not about performing emotions. It is about genuinely feeling them. Monroe was fascinated by this approach and committed to it with real intensity. Some people around her were skeptical. They thought she was overthinking something she was already doing naturally. Others felt that her dedication to craft was exactly what made her so compelling on screen. Monroe herself believed deeply that acting was important, serious, and worthy of the same level of study and respect as any other art form. She resented being seen as a pretty face rather than a real performer. Her work on method acting was her way of insisting on her own depth. The comedy and sparkle on screen were real, but so was the serious artist behind them. What looked like natural talent was also the result of dedicated study. Number 2. The film's legacy outlasted. Its era many films from 1953 are largely forgotten today. They were popular in their time, they served their purpose, and then they faded quietly into the archives. Gentlemen Prefer Blondes did not do that. It grew. As the decades passed, the film's reputation did not diminish. It deepened. Film scholars began writing about it seriously, analyzing its themes of gender, power, and performance. Feminist critics found rich and complicated material in Lorelei Lee's strategic manipulation of a world that underestimated her. Cultural historians used the film to discuss how Hollywood in the 1950s constructed femininity, and how certain performances challenged those constructions even while appearing to conform to them. The film was preserved, restored, and made newly available to younger audiences through home video and later streaming platforms. Each new generation that discovered it found something different to love: the comedy, the music, the costumes, the performances, the hidden satirical edge. The film also continued to influence other artists. Musicians, filmmakers, fashion designers, and cultural commentators have all borrowed from it, referenced it, and built upon it in ways that keep its spirit alive and circulating. A movie from 1953 became a permanent fixture in the cultural conversation. Not because it was preserved in a museum, but because it kept having something new to say to each new pair of eyes that found it. Great art does not age. It just keeps speaking. Number 1. Marilyn Monroe's performance redefined what a screen goddess could be. We arrive at the top of our list, and it belongs to the biggest truth of all. The fact that Marilyn Monroe's performance in Gentlemen Prefer Blondes did something that almost no performance in history has managed to do. It redefined a concept. Before this film, the idea of a screen goddess in Hollywood suggested a certain kind of woman: cool, distant, untouchable, mysterious. Think of the great stars of earlier decades, the ones who seemed carved from marble, beautiful but remote. Monroe shattered that mold completely and replaced it with something entirely new. Her Lorelei Lee was warm. She was funny. She was vulnerable. She was slightly absurd. She made mistakes. She had desires she was not ashamed of. She was, in the deepest sense, human, and yet she was also utterly extraordinary. Monroe managed to be both of these things simultaneously, which is one of the rarest gifts any performer can possess. The audience felt they could reach out and touch her through the screen, and yet she remained endlessly fascinating and impossible to fully know. This combination, the accessible and the unknowable, is what made her a phenomenon that the world has never quite gotten over. Dozens of talented, beautiful, brilliant women have come after her in Hollywood, and the world has measured them, sometimes unfairly, against the standard she set. Not because she was perfect, but because she was utterly, completely, gloriously herself. And herself was something the world had never seen before. One performance changed what was possible. Bonus fact: the hidden handprint ceremony that almost did not happen here is a secret that many fans of the film do not know, connected to a moment that happened around the same time as the film's release and became one of Hollywood's most beloved traditions. In the same year that Gentlemen Prefer Blondes was making its triumphant run in theaters, Marilyn Monroe and Jane Russell were invited to participate in one of Hollywood's most symbolic rituals, leaving their handprints and footprints in wet cement at Grauman's Chinese Theater on Hollywood Boulevard. This ceremony had been a tradition at the famous theater since the 1920s, and being invited to participate was considered a significant honor, a sign that a star had achieved a level of cultural importance that the industry recognized and wanted to make permanent. For Monroe and Russell, the invitation came directly as a result of the massive success of Gentlemen Prefer Blondes. The studio arranged the ceremony to celebrate the film and the two women who had made it a phenomenon. The event itself was playful and memorable. Both women pressed their hands into the soft cement. Russell also added her initials. Monroe, according to some accounts, inserted a rhinestone into the cement near her name. A sparkling, mischievous, perfectly Marilyn touch that perfectly captured the spirit of the character she had just made immortal. The handprints are still there today. Tourists walk past them every day, pressing their own hands into the space beside those famous impressions, trying to feel some connection to that moment and those two extraordinary women. The cement dried. The moment became permanent. And somewhere in those few square feet of Hollywood pavement, a little piece of that golden summer of 1953 is preserved forever. One small gesture made a moment last forever. Gentlemen Prefer Blondes is more than a musical comedy. It is a time capsule full of courage, creativity, and two women who refuse to be anything less than exactly themselves. Behind the diamonds and the pink satin gowns, behind the catchy songs and the glittering dance numbers, there is a story about two friends who trusted each other, about an artist who fought every day to be taken seriously, and about a film that quietly changed the rules about who gets to be powerful and how power can look. Every single frame of that movie was built by human hands, shaped by human choices, and brought to life by human hearts that believed in what they were making. The next time you watch Marilyn Monroe light up the screen, remember everything that was happening just out of frame. The weeks of rehearsal, the private fears, the small victories, and the large sacrifices. Remember that what looks effortless almost never is. If you enjoyed these stories, subscribe for more. Every movie hides a truth, and we'll keep uncovering them, one story at a time.